Coming up, summit intervention. European leaders hold an emergency call with President Trump ahead of his face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. The details of the meeting and what U.S. allies hope to accomplish.
Plus, D.C. takeover. The National Guard moves into the nation's capital as the president forges ahead with his crackdown on crime and homelessness. Is the military presence here to stay? And what's the role of Congress? We explain.
And MAGA divided.
Everything they're doing is demonic. I want nothing to do with it. I will never support Israel into the future after what they've done to these children, the starvation campaign. I don't care.
We dive into the growing tensions among the president's biggest cheerleaders and the split over the administration's support of Israel.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
All eyes on Alaska as President Trump prepares for a critical face-to-face with Vladimir Putin. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
And from our news bureau in Washington, D.C., I'm John Jessup. Well, 2 days from now, President Trump will meet with Russia's leader in what could be a defining moment for U.S. foreign policy and for the war still raging in Ukraine.
And tonight, we're learning more about a high-level call between Trump, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, and European leaders as diplomatic efforts ramp up ahead of the Alaska summit. But even as talks move forward, the White House is publicly lowering expectations, calling this week's summit a listening exercise. And on the ground, the fighting has not stopped. Russia is still pressing into eastern Ukraine. This as Mr. Trump issues a new ultimatum to President Putin. All right, here to break it all down, senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright and Michael O'Hanlon, senior fellow and director of research in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you both. Kelly, let's start with you. Can you talk about how the president assessed the call with Zelensky and European leaders earlier today?
Sure, John. Good evening to you both. He started off by telling us today at the Kennedy Center during his news presser there that the talks were very friendly, very cordial, and that the European Union leaders, as well as Zelensky, were urging him to actually seek a ceasefire with Putin. And of course, the president is concerned about that. He wants to be able to do that, to read the room, to see what's happening. The bottom line is that the EU is supporting him and hopeful that the president will be able to get an immediate ceasefire. In fact, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK was praising the president for opening the door in the first place to have this talk.
Yeah. Michael, if you were advising the president, what would you lay out as concerns or parameters for President Trump's meeting with Putin and a potential trilateral meeting with both Russia and Ukraine?
Hi, Jenna. Well, I'm generally encouraged by the preparation, the public statements, and Mr. Trump's lowering of expectations and realizing that he's not the guy to negotiate, for example, any land swaps. I think one thing you have to watch out for with Vladimir Putin, this is a guy who studies history and uses it for his own twisted purposes. And obviously, he knows the history of Eastern Ukraine much better than most of the rest of us, and certainly Donald Trump, but he sees it through his own perspective. And he's going to try to persuade Donald Trump that his perspective is right, that these lands really are innately Russian, going back to some previous century. And Mr. Trump has to watch out for that kind of nonsense. So I'm hopeful that he will. And again, I like the preparation and the sorts of things being said.
And could I jump in there real quickly to add to what Michael's saying? Because it was said today that Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine actually warned President Trump to beware of Putin, stating that Putin would be there to pull a bluff, that he's bluffing the president.
You know, in addition to that, thank you, Kelly, you know, Chancellor Merz stressed that the fundamental European and Ukrainian security interests must be protected in that call. Michael, I do want to ask you, President Trump threatened severe consequences if Russia doesn't agree to stop the fighting. Realistically, what can we expect to come out of this meeting, though?
Well, on the consequences, and then I'll come back to the expectations, I think that President Trump obviously has found his rhythm with applying tariffs. And he does it usually for economic purposes, but he's become, whether you like it or not, he's become very quick at figuring out how to use these, and he's figured out parts of laws that were written long ago that allowed presidential waivers or exceptions or sort of stretching the idea of the law, and he's used it to the hilt. And we've seen him apply now secondary sanctions or tariffs on India because he doesn't like India buying Russian oil, even though, by the way, originally the United States wanted India to buy Russian oil. So I think that's what he's alluding to. In terms of expectations, I would be personally thrilled if we could even see movement towards a ceasefire, and also movement towards the idea that if Russia wants land it doesn't currently control, it's going to have to do land swaps. That principle has been rejected by Russia so far. Frankly, it should be rejected and has been by Ukraine, because it's not fair to Ukraine. We're talking about swapping land, all of which was Ukrainian before the war began. But at a minimum, Putin's got to be willing to sort of either freeze the current line or to do these land swaps. Those are the kinds of things I'm looking for.
Yeah. Kelly, the White House is trying to manage expectations here, calling Friday a listening exercise. Does the president express any confidence in getting Putin to stop bombing at least the civilian areas in Ukraine?
To be clear, he does not expect Putin to stop bombing innocent civilians in Ukraine. Does he want a ceasefire? Yes. Is he expecting that? That remains to be seen. I think the president has tamped down the expectations to go there to listen to Vladimir Putin, and then he's hopeful that he will agree to ceasefire. He's also hopeful that they will have an immediate follow-up meeting that would be more of a trilateral meeting between he, Putin, and Zelensky, getting all three at the table to actually try to end this war.
Final thought from you, Michael Hanlon, before we leave.
Well, I like the idea of trying, as long as we bear in mind it's not likely to work, and that's going to require more pressure on Russia, not less. So that would be my final thought. I think it was good when President Trump tried to negotiate with the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un, in his first term, but bear in mind that didn't work. So you got to keep expectations low for these sorts of things.
Okay.
Manage expectations, final word.
Yeah. All right, Kelly and Michael, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, in other news, National Guard troops began deploying in the nation's capital city, with some joining the D.C. Metropolitan Police last night.
Yeah, 400 in the city right now, 800 expected by the end of the week. It's the latest effort by President Trump to crack down on crime and make D.C. safer. Here to bring a little more insight, Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London.
Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. John, Jenna, good evening to you. Well, I can tell you, if you live along the National Mall, you've probably already noticed a much different scene there. Rows of Hummers, take a look, and guardsmen posted along the mall as a mixture of residents and tourists walk by. The top mission for troops yesterday was to patrol the National Mall and especially to keep guard around the city's iconic monuments. Officials from the Trump administration say the troops are in position to assist local law enforcement. They also say clearing out people facing homelessness is a top priority, and 2 homeless camps on National Park Service property could be cleared out as soon as this week. Where those people will go is unclear for now. And tonight here throughout the streets of D.C., the White House says we can expect a much larger National Guard presence with the full group of 800 troops expected to be operational by the end of the week. Many have wondered, though, are these soldiers going to be armed? The Army says those on active duty will not carry weapons, but will have access to them.
London, how is President Trump responding? How has he responded since deploying the National Guard here?
Well, the White House did release the latest update since the National Guard has been on the ground. More than 1,400 people participated in law enforcement operations around the district overnight, including 750 police officers, 30 National Guard troops, and federal law enforcement agents. As for crackdowns on crime, officials say 43 people were arrested last night. Nearly half of those detained were migrants. That's according to the White House. Earlier today, President Trump did tell reporters at the Kennedy Center that he's already seeing and hearing about a safer D.C. with active soldiers here on the ground. Listen.
You see a big change, and people are feeling safe already. I've had so many calls. Thank you, sir. Thank you. They were afraid to walk out. They're not afraid anymore. And this will be like the border.
And critics of the president's decision to federalize law enforcement and employ the National Guard are pointing to recent reports which show cases of crime in the district have actually been falling, with violent crime down 26% from last year and the homicide rate down 11%. That's according to the U.S. Census Bureau.
London, so Washington, D.C. is a unique jurisdiction. It's the only jurisdiction where a president has the power to authorize the deployment of the National Guard for up to 30 days. What happens after that 30-day period?
John, that is a good question. Earlier today, President Trump announced that he's already planning to ask Congress to extend his 30-day federal takeover here in Washington, D.C. But if Congress chooses not to grant him those extensions, Trump said he would declare a national emergency to continue his control over D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department and National Guard troops. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt first mentioned yesterday that the administration would reevaluate and reassess whether the 30-day period was too short for Trump's planned enforcement.
Okay, Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London. London, thank you.
Well, as Israel's plans for Gaza divide the international community, here at home, support for Israel is creating a rift among Republicans. Faith Nation will be right back.
All right, welcome back. Israel's military is intensifying strikes on Gaza City as the IDF pushes ahead with plans to take full control.
That's right. At the same time, Israel is signaling it's open to a deal, but only if it includes the return of all hostages. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the window for a partial deal has closed and that the war will end on Israel's terms.
It's behind us. We tried. We made all kinds of attempts. We went through a lot, but it turned out that they were just misleading us. And in any case, they will leave a lot of hostages in their hands, both the living and the dead, and we want them all.
Israel may send negotiators to Qatar this week with full support from President Trump. Meanwhile, a new Israeli report given to the International Committee of the Red Cross details Hamas's torture of Israeli hostages. Israel's health ministry says the 12 hostages freed earlier this year endured sexual harassment, worm-infested food, and months without showers or clean clothes.
We weren't allowed to move. We were starved while they ate in front of us. We were thirsty because they didn't give us water, even though they drank water and ate in front of us. And we weren't allowed to even cry.
The United Nations put Hamas on a blacklist, citing sexual violence during the October 7th attacks. It also warned Israel it might be put on the list for alleged abuse of Palestinian detainees. Israel's ambassador to the UN called the accusation, quote, unfounded and absurd.
Well, the war in Gaza is starting to expose a new divide between President Trump and some of his strongest supporters.
First, it was the release of the Epstein files, and now, as CBN chief political analyst David Brody reports, some of his backers are speaking out against the president's support for Israel.
America's support for Israel has always been strong, and overall, while it still is, some far-right high-profile influencers have taken a hard turn against the Jewish state.
Everything they're doing is demonic. I want nothing to do with it. I will never support Israel into the future after what they've done to these children. The starvation campaign, I don't care.
Others, like Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, want America out of Israel's affairs. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of MAGA's biggest voices in Congress, has called what's happening in Gaza genocide. Poll numbers also seem to suggest a slight drop in Israeli support among the GOP. 15 years ago, in 2010, Republican support for Israel stood at 85%. Today it's still strong, yet down to 75%. The more alarming statistic among Republicans today is that 37% have a negative view of the Jewish state. That's up 10% from just 2022, when it was 27%. Part of what's driving some of this MAGA division is coming from younger voters. It's a generation that is much more wary of international conflicts and has bought into President Trump's non-interventionist approach. For example, while 72% of Republicans overall believe America's military should support Israel, only 32% of Gen Z Trump voters feel that way. Julian Becerra, a conservative influencer on TikTok, agrees.
We need to invest in the United States first. And I think it's hypocritical of conservatives to say, yes, we're for deportations. We want to, build a wall, seal up the border, to put America first, but also say, hold on, because it's Israel, let's go ahead and send them billions of dollars.
It's part of a free-thinking mindset fueled by the powerful social media landscape.
I think the younger demographic, which has access to the social media and understands that platform, can hear the different opposing views, and they're starting to make up their mind and not just have that blind support for it.
While that's true, there are plenty of young conservatives who are pushing back. 19-year-old Breland Hollyhand works with the RNC to get out the Gen Z vote.
I think that that's a fringe that has gotten really loud. It certainly doesn't represent the vast majority of MAGA that I talk to, specifically on college campuses, just from my perspective. For me specifically, I mean, this support of Israel isn't a political stance, it's a biblical stance. And it's very clear, repeatedly throughout the Bible that those that bless Israel, the Lord will bless them. That's not something that is old or false or dated. That is still a truth here in 2025.
What's also true in 2025 is a MAGA movement trying to understand where Israel fits into an America First agenda. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, inflation in America, a look at the U.S. economy.
Well, welcome back. Some good signs for the economy. Global stocks rose today as traders bet the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates next month.
It comes after Tuesday's better than expected inflation report. Prices in July were up 2.7% from last year, just under the 2.8% forecast. But core inflation is starting to heat up. Core inflation strips out food and energy prices, items that can swing up and down quickly. The Fed watches this number closely because it better reflects long-term trends. Despite core inflation rising, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a rate cut is still likely, possibly by half a point.
Well, for more, let's bring in Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate.com. Mark, it's always great to have you.
Good to see you, John and Jenna. Thank you.
Good to see you, Mark. So the stock market loved the moderate inflation report. What was your take on it, Mark? And should we be concerned about core inflation ticking up?
I wouldn't attach too much importance regarding the performance of the stock market relative to inflation data. The stock market's been on a tear for some time, and that affects a relatively small number of individuals and even our viewers. Of course, everybody who has some exposure to the stock market, including those saving for their retirements via 401k, is glad to see that. We don't want to be dismissive of it either. Broadly, I think you broke it down well. There was some better than expected news here, or as expected news, and then some that wasn't as good as expected. And the reality, John and Jenna, is that price levels continue to go up. The Consumer Price Index that you just referenced is up 24% since January of 2020. And within these categories, there were some signs that tariffs are beginning to have an impact. We see food away from home, in other words, restaurants and the like, continuing to rise more. That's a function of all the things that cause prices to go up in restaurants, like labor, the cost of real estate, ... That is something to watch. Elsewhere, we see services prices rising if you exclude things like shelter and utilities, and there are pockets of utilities that are going up. So while the stock market may be finding reasons to rally, I don't see Americans quite ready to dance in the streets about the level of prices that they're seeing out there.
With the core inflation rising, Mark, do you think the Fed is still on track to cut rates next month, or does this make that decision a bit harder?
I would say it's a strong possibility. We still have about another month's worth of data to go, and that includes the job market data, a couple of weeks from now, and then the same inflation round a month from now. And so with respect to the futures market, it is fully pricing in either a 0.25% rate cut or 0.5% at the mid-September meeting. And many are thinking that we could get another rate cut after that by the end of the year. The other part is that, as we've discussed earlier, the job market has been slowing. And so, talking about the stock market finding reasons to rally, it's not something to be celebratory if we're seeing essentially hiring grind to a halt. So obviously a complicated situation, a lot to monitor here.
Complicated indeed, but maybe if we can uncomplicate, you had just talked about the potential of maybe 2 interest rate cuts before the end of the year. If the Fed does cut rates next month, how soon could everyday Americans feel that in their loans and credit card payments and mortgage payments?
Well, it's funny. I've been talking to my colleagues about this, and I've been saying, the things that are concerns about the economy right now, I don't think are really truly addressed significantly by even a couple of rate cuts at the hands of the Federal Reserve. So, would it really cause a great change in the quality of everybody's life who's watching right now? I would say not so much. But in the sense of, let's break it down. The Fed controls short-term interest rates, and that does have an impact on things like credit card rates and savings. And so I would say it will be a rather slow process because we're still talking about a slow process in cutting rates. So we're going to see slightly lower credit card interest rates, but also less return on savings, and eventually we see it filter into things like auto loans as well. But we're still in a high price environment as well, so we have to think about the cost of financing and then the prices of the things that we want to buy.
Okay, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate.com. Always good to see you. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Well, coming up, President Trump announces the 2025 Kennedy Center honorees and the future of the institution. That and more next on Faith Nation.
Download the CBN News app. One place for all of your news. Breaking news alerts. Watch CBN News Channel live. CBN News, because truth matters. Get the CBN News app today.
Finally tonight, President Trump announced the 48th class of Kennedy Center honorees in Washington today.
The president, who assumed the role of Kennedy Center chairman back in February, talked about the future of the Performing Arts Center and this year's lineup. The next class of honorees are country music singer George Strait, singer-actor Michael Crawford, Sylvester Stallone of Rocky fame, Gloria Gaynor, and the rock band Kiss. Trump says he's returning the D.C. cultural institution to the top level of luxury and entertainment. Part of the overhaul, the premiere of CBN's newest film, The Revival Generation, capturing the move of God happening in Gen Z.
It's revival. It's a movement, and I still think it's just getting started.
The film premieres at the Kennedy Center Wednesday, August 27th. Tickets are free, and Jenna, I think we should walk the red carpet.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to have it at the Kennedy Center, very cool.
Also interesting to see that President Trump said he will be hosting the Kennedy Center honorees.
You know what? No matter how people feel about it, I think people will be tuning in for that.
I definitely
It's
will
going to be
tuning in.
interesting. Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
Have a great night.